Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Now's the Time TV, or The Time Is Now TV, even. And it's a pleasure tonight to be joined by someone I've been aware of and spoken to in the past. He's been a freedom-based campaigner for some time. He's hitting some real prominence now, which I'm absolutely delighted about. And he's doing us proud, those of us fighting for freedom. So, Richard Taylor, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you, Bill. Listen, firstly, let me say a huge thank you for inviting me on. It's an absolute privilege to be on with your show tonight.
Thank you. Well, it's really the privilege is ours because you've been doing some fantastic work. I think many people will have seen you rise more to prominence since the campaigning and protesting that's been going on in London and other parts of the country against lockdowns and against some of the government policy that's happening. I think it would be interesting for the viewers to understand before we get into the meat of our conversation. You spoke to me a little bit about this before. What is it that motivates you to spend your time, to get out there and campaign and fight the way you do?
I think it's not as much political as it is to do with my kids. It's to do with their future and the future of other children as well. And, I'm concerned over the destiny that they have ahead of them. And when government are proposing things that affect their everyday lives, that have an impact on their mental health, as a father of 5 children, happily married for over 25 years, almost a life sentence. I don't look old enough to be honest. Someone said you got married when you were 10, Rich, did you? But seriously, I'm really concerned about the future, the direction that our country is going in, how society has been so broken and fragmented, really, and so divisive. And a lot of this has come from mainstream media propaganda. It's come from politicians who just toe the line, and from this government, which I've more lately called a regime more than a government, to be honest with you, Bill.
Yeah, that's been one of the things I've noted. You've been putting forward some views and some campaigning style that has really resonated with me. And one of the things that's always motivated me to do things I've done in the past is a loathing of big government, a loathing of authoritarianism. And when you start using terms like regime about our government, I think it's more than just an attacking word. It actually, in this case, it really does mean something, doesn't it? It does show the change that's gone on.
Yeah, if you look in history and you look at the regimes that have existed, authoritarian is the right word that you've used. It's a word I use a lot of, because when a government can legislate through a coronavirus act, for example, to make decisions that take away your social liberties, your freedoms, as they've done, as we've seen previously, through lockdowns and extending lockdowns, and deciding what we can and buy and sell in shops. For example, here in Wales, we had Mark Drakeford, the First Minister, saying that you could not buy non-essential goods from shops. So we had aisles taped up with stuff. We had pubs that were told they could open but couldn't sell alcohol. That's like a butcher opening, not being able to sell meat. It's just ridiculous. Some of these rules were so draconian. And I think the impact that it's had on people, I was speaking to someone last week, actually, who works in mental health, and the data, according to the ONS, Office of National Statistics, has said that last year, or year before the pandemic, there were 5 million cases of mental health situations recorded. This last year gone, there were 10 million recorded cases of people that have phoned up with mental health issues. So the impact this has had on society, I don't think has fully been seen yet, Bill. And I think it'll take a few years, with public inquiries that need to happen. Wales has been acquitted itself of that because it's going to be a UK-wide one, which I don't agree with, because they have legislative powers here in Wales, and they've taken lockdown far further than people did in England and the government did in England. And I think there should be a public inquiry into Wales's handling. But that aside, I think the long-term impact that this has had on our children's education, on mental health, on the cancellation of operations, for example, cancer patients that have messaged me, waiting lists that have gone through the roof that they will never catch up on. And all the government's line seems to be, we're trying to protect you and the NHS. Well, I'm sorry, but 25% of people here in Wales actually caught COVID when they went into hospital. And that is a government fact figure. And it's not me just quoting some off the top of my head. And so, I'm more likely to catch COVID off going to the hospital than I am from my children. And that really tells us the state that we're in with the NHS and obviously the management of that. And here in Wales, 5 out of 7 of our health boards have been in special measures even before the pandemic. That tells you the state of play things here are in Wales.
Well, you hit upon a range of really important factors here. And I know that you've been talking about these things for ever since I think this started, and that was one of the things that I was trying to do. And 16 months ago, people weren't really taking much notice, and now people are starting to sit up and take notice. And one of the big issues for me, I think, is the mental health issue that you've raised, because there was a serious issue in the United Kingdom with mental health well before lockdowns and all the rest of it. But if you lock people away, stop them seeing their nearest and dearest, bombard them with fear porn through mainstream media every 2 minutes, telling them that they're literally about to die, or if they touch anyone, someone's likely to die, you get a real epidemic. A real epidemic of mental illness. And you raised some figures, and I think I saw one through, might have been the Mind charity, where they were saying that there was up to 10 million people, I think, on antidepressants in this country.
Yeah.
Which, you know, you can't get into a doctor's surgery, but if you phone them up and ask for something like that, you get handed it like, you know, Smarties. I mean, that you're right, aren't you? There is a serious long-term mental health issue in this country that's really going to be a crisis.
Yeah, and on that, Bill, you know, when you consider, you know, we know Matt Hancock's story, he was getting his leg over with, you know, his lover, which I'm not going to go into his personal sex life because that's not for me to comment on. But suffice to say, when politicians show such hypocrisy, members of the public, myself, and people in society, we lose trust and confidence in our politicians. And it's not the first time. Here in Wales, we've seen it when the drinking ban was introduced, you know, pubs not cancel alcohol. We had members of the Welsh Parliament here, 4 of them, that were caught drinking in the Senedd, which is the Welsh Parliament. And of course, we had the Matt Hancock incident as well, which led to his removal as the health minister. And I think people are just really fed up of the pure hypocrisy that we're seeing from this government, and there's so many U-turns that they're doing and changing things at the last minute by a press release. It's not been scrutinised. It's not gone through parliamentary scrutiny. It's not been debated in the House of Commons. It's just been decided in a cabinet with Boris Johnson. And he said, this is what we're going to do. And this is a man, don't forget, who claimed to be a libertarian, someone who said, listen, I'm for the freedom of people. And what we're seeing right now is completely the opposite. And I think people are waking up to it, Bill. I know we might feel sometimes we're in the minority and we get abused online, as you know, for our views and everything else. And we get called conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff. The reality is we're just ordinary people who work to earn a living, pay our taxes, look after our families, and we see through what the government is doing. We see through this smoke screen. We know exactly what's going on. It's about control. It's about testing us to see how much they can get away with. And I fear that unless there is a political revolution, whatever that looks like, then we are going to be left with a government that will, roughshod over everything and just make decisions last minute that affect our lives and take away what is most important to us, our civil liberties. And we live in a democracy, don't forget. Some would argue that democracy died. And a lot of my friends are conservatives here in Wales. They voted and backed Boris Johnson because of let's get Brexit done, which you played a big part in, I know, as an MEP, Bill. And I think it's important for people to understand that just because a government was saying the right things back in the days of Brexit, it doesn't mean now that they are. And I just feel that we've been fed this narrative of fear the government have used. And it's almost like a mass religion of fear that they've placed upon the country, and they're using it effectively, may I say, as well, because YouGov polls, for example, have shown that people are in favour of masks, in favour of social distancing. But let's not forget that the vaccine minister was one of the founders of YouGov. And people don't know this. And so I hope your viewers are listening tonight and you pay attention to that, because we're being played here by the government. And it's something we need to really, really be concerned about.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the subject of YouGov, we used to, back in the old UKIP days, I used to look at the YouGov poll, and I had a formula that was absolutely always perfect. You times it by 2, and you add 5% onto it, and that's where you really are. And it always worked out to the digit. But you're right about, we have, it's almost a state religion now. We have to worship at the altar of the NHS. The people of Sage are the high priests or the witch doctors or druids. And if you are a heretic, I'm afraid you and me are heretics. We could be up for the Inquisition. You do get under attack from the mob. Burn the witch, burn the witch. And it has been instilled by fear, because all of the things that you and I have pointed out and probably will tonight, where we question what's happening, You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see it. It's not hidden. It's in plain view. But the fear and the worship of the state and the NHS has become so prevalent that people aren't actually using their critical faculty.
Yeah, well, how you control people is by fear. When you have a population or a society that's under fear, they're fearful to do anything. And so they look for leadership. They look for guidance. They look for a savior, a messiah, because they're fearful of what's going on. And this is what we had for 18 months, don't forget, from BBC, Sky News, all the mainstream media telling us that, this is evil, millions of people are going to die. And let's be quite honest here, and this is factual. Some of these scientists, like Neil Ferguson, for example, and Keir Starmer, who quoted him, were pushing this message of fear, saying 100,000 people are going to die with this new variant. And, that didn't age very well, because that's not what's happened. Case rates are coming down. Some people, of course, we're not anti-vax. If you want to have the vaccination, it's your choice. What I am is about pro-choice, giving people the choice, but that choice has to be an informed choice. And unfortunately, how can a medical procedure such as the vaccines, which I'm not going to, I've mentioned that I'm not anti-vax, but I would say that given the speed in which that it's been developed and released in record time, more than any other vaccine, polio or anything else, in that space of time, and released so quickly under the Emergency Coronavirus Act, then for me, I sit back and think, well, as a father, I'm thinking, I got kids here, and they said the vaccination wasn't for children. Matt Hancock said that in the House of Commons. He made a statement, said this vaccination is not for children, it's for adults. And now we've slipped down that scale, you see. We've gone from 16 to 17-year-olds with underlying conditions. Now it's just 16 and 17-year-olds. Then it's 12-year-olds with underlying conditions. Now, and it's going to slide. How far is this government prepared to go? And that's what concerns me. For this reason, Bill, is we don't have any long-term data. We don't know the effects that it'll have on children. And I think it's crucial that we as human beings sit back and think to ourselves, well, hang on a minute. We understand there's a virus. The elderly, the vulnerable have been vaccinated. That's what the government said needed to happen to lift all restrictions for herd immunity to continue through society. We get back to normal. But that's not what's happening. This is not about a vaccine or a virus. There's something greater at play here, and it's about power and control, and corrupted power as well, in my opinion.
Yep, and as I think I'll just intervene on behalf of the Big Brother Thought Police, who will be monitoring all social media activity. I'd like to state that the vaccination program has officially been approved by the World Health Organization, and is, I'm sure we will both agree, there is no question at all about these jabs, which frankly I'm not going to have, even if they drag me kicking and screaming. But we can say categorically that we're not
Bill,
against them.
You say that, but the problem is you get demonized. When you make that statement, I choose not to have the vaccine. I've been called a murderer. I've been called a nanny killer. I've been called also. Listen, I can handle it. If you're not hated, you're not loved. If you're in this game, you're a public figure like yourself. You need to be able to take all those criticisms, of course. But it's sad when that comes from social media. When Boris Johnson called us idiots, and vaccine minister and the new health secretary now making statements about members of the public, really demonizing us for being people who choose pro-choice not to have the vaccine, not because we don't think it has an effect or it's of any value to people who are vulnerable or elderly, but for the simple reason we have a conscience, we have a mind, we have common sense, and we think to ourselves, well, hang on a minute, I would approach this with caution. Because let's be honest, how many people in our community, especially here in Wales and around the UK, actually trust politicians? The trust in politicians is negligible. It's almost zero. People don't trust politicians. So when a politician tells you to inject something into your arm, whether it is right or wrong, people don't believe them because of the way that they've dealt with it. For example, kebab for a jab. Discount at McDonald's, you can go, all these coercive language has not helped people trust the government when they're trying to push the vaccine rollout onto people.
Well, it's extraordinary, actually, that if you look and dig down into the figures for the people who died in this pandemic, and, relevant to me, I'm a chubby chap, one of the major factors is obesity. So when they're giving a public health drive of these extremely essential jabs, they're also bribing people with the most fatty junk food imaginable. But yet another example of it not making sense. But I will state for the record, as we discussed this, I'm not anti-vax. I've had all sorts of jabs and pills and God knows what when I've had to travel around the world. No problem at all. And if I thought for 1 second that this jab was going to be useful or effective or would stop me being a grand scale murderer of grandmothers, I would actually take it. But I don't believe that. And I believe that when you lose bodily autonomy and you are enthralled to the state to such a degree that you can't even control what goes into your body, that's when you've really lost freedom. And this is coming from me. I'm someone who I'm quite relaxed about drug legislation, for example. I'm really liberal about these things. I don't care what you put into yourself, smoke, pop. I don't give a monkeys. But what I do care about is that it's your choice and that you're not being coerced or forced into it.
Yeah, and I think that the bigger concern is, these are all facts from Public Health England, Public Health Wales. Since the pandemic began, I think I mentioned at the start here, since it began, those aged 0 to 19 years of age, 44 have died up until the 21st of July. That's from the start of the pandemic. Now, 80% of those, according to Public Health England and Public Health Wales, 80% of those 44 had underlying conditions. So put into context, that's 10 people aged 0 to 19 that have died of this virus since the pandemic began. And now we have a situation where the government are pushing a message of you need to get vaccinated because you're vulnerable. They're not vulnerable. These are not my figures. These are figures published by Public Health England, Public Health Wales. And I find it so concerning as a father, as a dad. And, I was walking around my hometown a couple of weeks ago, and I was watching people and just observing. I'm a bit of a people watcher, Bill. Not a pervert, a people watcher. Slightly different, I don't know. And thank God. But I was watching people, and people were literally walking around with masks on outside when they didn't need to. And I just seen that people have been conditioned by the government. They've been, literally, they've been forced to do things that don't feel normal, that have become normal to them. So I call it the chin mask. A lot of people walking around with a mask under their chin, because they can't bother to take it off. And that's become the new normal. I'm maybe like you, Bill. I don't accept the new normal. I don't accept it. Pre-COVID, that's my life. That's how things should be. We all talked about Brexit in those days. Now we're talking about COVID and everything else. But I think what it's done is it's broken society. It's divided families. I had a woman message me privately, and name will remain anonymous. She messaged me privately today. She works in the NHS. She's not had the vaccine. Now, I know this might be different for a lot of healthcare workers where they've been forced to have it, or apparently it's been mandatory unless they want to lose their jobs. And that's another concern I have. But she messaged me saying she's under so much pressure that she's afraid to speak out. She has a 6-year-old daughter, and she doesn't want, to have the vaccine herself, and she's afraid if they push it down, if they legislate and make it law, then what's she going to do? And these are honest heart. This person works in the NHS, and I have had multiple messages like that come through, and it's really sad that the government have made people feel like this. Now, one personal example I want to give you. So my wife yesterday, she only told me this morning about this. My wife yesterday walked into my son's bedroom. They're off school at the moment. He's 15. I got 5, but this is the 15-year-old, which is the third son. I walked in the bedroom, and he said to my wife, he said, "Mom, do I have to have the vaccine?" And my mom and my wife said to him, "No, you don't." And he broke down, chucked his arms around her and said, "Thank you, Mom." He was scared of having the vaccine. So while children have been hashtagging, and they've been jumping on the bandwagon when I set up a hashtag the other day, "Leave our kids alone," it went viral, started trending. Then all of a sudden, these youngsters were on there, were woke left liberals coming on there saying, "Oh, don't tell us kids what to do." Now, it's a medical fact, actually, that people's brains stop developing when they get to 25. So their brains are still growing. So at 16 and 17, yes, I've got a range of children. Taking away that parental consent for me is a concern. I think, parents need to be involved in that conversation, as I've been with my 2 eldest. Now, for the record, my 2 eldest, who are 21 and 19, have both had the vaccination. Now, that will, calm the people who call me anti-vax, out, if you know what I mean. They've had the vaccination because they're adults. That was their choice. But when it's pushed on teenagers, and the expression my wife told me about my son Jacob, who literally threw his arms around her and said, "Ma'am, thank." He was scared of having the vaccine. And she asked him why. She said, "Well, it's a new thing, ma'am, isn't it?" And he doesn't know the science, but he's got enough common sense to go, "Well, hang on a minute. Is this right? I want to wait and see." And I think that is where I'm at as a father. And that's why I'm passionate about campaigning politically through protest, through lobbying the government, through joining all kinds of, petitions and doing all I can, because sometimes it is a wilderness, a voice crying out in the wilderness, but we're not alone. There's lots of us out there like yourself, Bill, and many of your viewers tonight, I should imagine.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the great things about the protests, and the fact that despite the efforts to censor us, we managed to reach out on social media, that it makes you realise you aren't alone. There were times at the start of all this that I did feel like, maybe it's me, maybe I've gone mad, and I'm seeing something that no one else is, and perhaps I should jack it all in. But that is a really helpful thing. Now, but when it comes to jabs, though, my members of my family have had the jab. In fact, my parents have. And I drove them there to have it because it's about balance of risks. My parents are 75 and 80. Now, looking at that, and I respect their opinions and their views, they felt, on balance, it was probably the right thing to do. And I can see their argument, and fair enough.
Yeah.
Whereas a youngster or a child, the risk of mortality from this virus is infinitesimally small, and it just doesn't, in my opinion, make sense. And my son, without any input from me actually on it, because he doesn't watch what I do on social media and all the rest of it, he's not in the remotest bit interested. He came to me the other day and said, "Dad, not having that jab, not having it." I said, "Well, fair enough, mate. That's your choice." I mean, I didn't tell him that if he was going to have it, I'd have probably given him a slap around the ear, but that's not the point. I think that we should understand the balance of risk. And if you're old, if you're infirm, then as far as I'm concerned, I can entirely understand why you would have this.
Yeah, but
if you're not, I don't see why.
One of your viewers here in the chat, private chat, I can see, and I'm going to answer this question from Daniel. Daniel has asked, confirm you've had other vaccines. Well, of course I have. When I was younger, polio, TB, we had those in school. Of course I have. But those were vaccines that had gone through 10, 15 years of trial. This is a vaccine that has been brought out at speed, at record speed. In fact, an interview was conducted with one of the founders of the vaccine on Good Morning. I think it was Phil Schofield and what's his name's program, ITV. And they said within, 2-3 days, they'd found the vaccine, just out of the blue. Now, if that doesn't give you cause for concern, if you want to believe that, that's fine. That's okay. That's your choice. But Daniel, I would say to you, don't demonize people who are cautious because they're looking out for their family. That's what I'd say to you. I'd say just take a step back and say, we're not telling people not to have the vaccine, but we're just being cautious. That's all we're doing. And I think, and I respect your opinion, Daniel, and other viewers, but you must respect mine as well. That's what, freedom of society and freedom of thought and speech and everything is. That's what it's about, Bill,
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that that's one of the problems that we've got, is that we're not being allowed to have this freedom of thought and freedom of speech. Now, you mentioned that conversation that was on TV, and I saw that when I think they said they actually came up with the vaccine in 3 hours, not 3 days. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But then I saw a clip of the leader of the free world, the wonderful President Biden, that highly coherent and totally together guy. And he said on that clip that they've been working for decades on this jab. Now, it could be that dear old Sleepy Joe was having another one of his episodes and he perhaps wasn't getting it right. But if that is the case, that opens up a whole different line of conversation, doesn't it, where we might be putting our tinfoil hats on.
Well, of course. Well, why prepare a vaccine for a virus that's not in the population? Is it because there's something intended to release it into the population? I mean, those are reasonable questions. I'm not suggesting that is the case, but they're reasonable questions. And I think what is really sad today is people just accept what the government tell them. They accept a scientist that's put on television now, whether it's SAGE or the GCVI, they just accept what they say. And if you look around, and you don't have to search hard enough, you will find different opinions from people in the same medical field, same scientific field, and yet they have opposing views. And I think putting that into context and listening to other voices is the way that we come out with conclusions and answers. If we just listen to one side of the argument, then we fail really to understand what debate and what discussion and education is about. Because I mean, when I was in university, I did my degree in Birmingham, actually, of all places, Birmingham University, your neck of the woods, sir. I remember that one of the lecturers always saying to us, listen, you always need to listen to two sides of the arguments before you come to your conclusions. And I think what people are doing, they're shutting down this conversation. They're shutting down the debate. They say there's no debate. We are right. You are wrong. And you know, just yesterday, I found that one of the guys, I think it's Shin Ling Li Wei or something, one of the guys on the JCVI was actually, he's got shares and he's got a conflict of interest with the vaccine program. You know, and that's not me saying that. Google it yourself. It's on Wikipedia. You'll find it. You know, the evidence is there. And when you consider that there are many within the government as well, politicians, who have directorships, shares in some of the companies providing some of the PPE, some of the vaccine rollout. If you don't question that, then I question your sanity, to be honest with you. You need to have a word with yourself, because that is serious. And I think to blindly accept what the state tells you without questioning it is where we've got to. And they've done it, once again, I go back to my opening remarks, they've done it through fear. They've used fear to control us. And
what's happened, of course, is that the ordinary Joe and the small businessman, certainly the person working in hospitality, have been absolutely crushed over the last 16 months. But billionaire businessmen, global corporations have increased their wealth dramatically. And it's Robin Hood in reverse, because, you know, taxpayers' money has been taken and flooded out to these huge corporations.
It's like the elite, isn't it? So you remember when we couldn't travel because you couldn't afford, a lot of people can't afford the tests that you have to put in place to travel, for example. You know, we're watching Wimbledon, we're watching Ascot, we were watching all these events on our television screens with celebrities and politicians, all, you know, taking selfies of themselves and how wonderful it was. While us little people, you know, we weren't able to go to those events for whatever reason. And then they talked about, you know, they had to prove that they'd been vaccinated. And then there was this whole discussion around vaccine passports, which I'm sure we'll come to a bit later, Bill. But it just strikes me that it's an us and them kind of division in society. And I think ordinary, hard working class people like myself, and I am working class, you know, I've come from a working class background, working class family. I find it just I say without swearing, because I know we're podcasting, it just grinds my gears.
Well done.
Like that. If I put it like that, it really, really does. And I think that, you know, standing up for the rights and to defend people for their freedoms is important, but also to understand that this affects, you know, the single parent, the you know, the family just with two or three children who are struggling on universal credit, who can't make ends meet, who have been locked down for 18 months of their lives, and they've had their liberties taken away, where the kids have had to stay at home and they couldn't afford to feed them. This is the real reality of what I've witnessed on the ground. And I think, you know, we can talk about the statisticians and the numbers and the science and politicians, but, you know, when you walk in your communities like you are in Birmingham, I know Birmingham very well. I lived in Tipton in the Black Country.
Oh, yeah, not far from me.
Till I moved to Solihull, the posh part of Birmingham.
Oh, came up in the world, yeah.
It was, yeah. But, you know, I'm just an ordinary bloke. I see what happens in people's lives. And when you see what politicians say or the mainstream media, and then you walk down your local, you know, down the valleys here in Wales in particular, it's just totally divorced. It's not what we're hearing from mainstream. And that's why, you know, platforms like this with yourself, Bill, and this channel is much needed. We need alternative media to be able to speak like this, because I would be absolutely cancelled or shut down by the BBC or Sky or mainstream media if I was saying the things I'm saying to you now.
Yeah, and believe you me, it's not always that easy to keep it going on the alternative media as well. But one thing that does strike me is the same, really, and has been going on now for years, is people like you and me, I think it's polite to say, perhaps outsiders to the establishment, fighting, first of all, for Brexit, and now fighting for individual freedoms against what I would class as a tyranny you put as a regime. And you mentioned before Boris Johnson, the Conservative leader there, calling us idiots. Well, prior to that, we had Conservative leaders, when we were talking about Brexit, calling us cranks and gadflies, boggle-eyed loons. and a variety of things. And it's the
They're,
same.
they're still calling us that, aren't they, Brexiteers? They're still having a go. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Verhofstadt tweeted earlier today, Bill, if I may say, I don't know if you saw it. He tweeted that Europe has won more medals than China and I think it was United States or something like that. And I had to remind him that Europe is not a country. I mean, they can't let go, can they? Let's be honest.
I feel sorry for poor old Guy. I must say he really is passionate about the EU. And one thing he would do that lots of the other fanatics over there would never do, if you gave him a question or you wanted to question him or come against him, he would take it. He would argue back and engage because he's that committed. And I remember saying to him before the referendum, I said, "Guy, do me a favour. I love how committed you are to the EU and the way you put your ideas. Be my guest and come out to the UK and I'll put you on a platform and you can tell everyone what you're saying here because I think it would be the best thing for Brexit anyone could ever do." And, he was quite tempted to come, actually, because he's that fanatical.
But you say that, Bill, but isn't that how it should be for debate? I was at an event last week, Academy of Ideas with Claire Fox, someone you know very well, who's a former MEP with yourself as well, who's in the House of Lords. And I was at that event and, it was wonderful to be there because there were so many people with different opinions opposed to mine, and debate was allowed to continue and flow. Questions were asked of the panel, and just the freedom to have that discussion and to disagree. You didn't have to be a great academic to be there. I'm certainly not. I'm a Welshman, but I think it's important in a free society. We need to have that openness. We need to have that debate. Bringing it back to the whole government issue now, there's been no debate. There's been no scrutiny. Things have been rushed through under the Coronavirus Emergency Act, legislated for powers that are way beyond what they should have. And that which leads me to saying that, what we're under, as you mentioned, tyranny. And I've been pushing this out on social media, as you know, and I've been criticized hugely for mentioning medical apartheid, tyranny, authoritarian, all of these words, buzzwords, but they're words that mean something because that is what we're seeing in society. And I think we need to have that space for debate to be able to discuss these issues.
Yeah, and by the way, I think it is great that Claire Fox is in the House of Lords. I think the closest I would get to that is the Tower of London, but that would be for a whole different reason. Yeah, so it's nice to see it there anyway. But we're gonna talk now about what you mentioned earlier because we've thrown around a few words here, and people quite possibly would say, "Oh, lads, you're over-egging it. You're over-egging it. You're making a big deal of it." That's where I want us to start discussing vaccine passports, ID cards. What's your big objection? Let's spell this out.
Yeah, I think for me, my objection is when they say these are not mandatory or forced upon us, that people are correct. We're not being told you have to have a vaccine passport. We're being told all this kind of stuff. But before I get onto the vaccine passport, I want to talk about the NHS app that has created chaos in the country when people have been pinged by this app and then had to self-isolate. Now, this now has led to, I was speaking to a friend earlier today who told me that the same kind of app is the same kind of app they're talking about using as a vaccine passport. Now, what the government have done here in Wales is different to Westminster. So the First Minister of Wales, Matt Drakeford, what he has said is that it's not up for government to legislate for whether or not you should have a vaccine passport to prove you've been vaccinated to enter into a nightclub or a pub or a restaurant or to travel. It's up to the individual business. Whereas Westminster have done something different. Boris has done something completely different. He has been quite, coercive over people, encouraging people to have the vaccine, yes. But at the same time, they have floated the idea, as you and I know very well, that, nightclubs and indoor spaces where, there's poor ventilation, or if you're traveling on public transport, as we've seen with Sadiq Khan, who's imposed it on Londoners' travel on the tube and on the down there in London on buses. But when I was down there last week, half the people weren't even wearing masks. They're not even listening to him. But, the idea that we have to introduce this kind of vaccine passport, so that you can have really what are your freedoms to move around, to do things, just normal things, whether to go to the gym, go for a meal with your family, even go to a pub. Now, people might think that this is not coming. Now, don't forget, this hasn't got to Parliament yet. This hasn't gone through any legislation, not been debated, although politicians have spoken out against it on social media. And I think what Boris is trying to do, he's trying to play the libertarian card, but at the same time, he's also trying to say, well, look, it's not the government's decision, but we would encourage businesses, whether it's travel or domestic business here in Wales, to look at this as a way of stopping the spread of coronavirus. That's what I think is happening. And I think we've not seen the end of it. In fact, I'm on a march this month on the 14th in London. There's no speakers. There's no official organisation organizing. It's just people getting together from Channing's Cross to march down to 10 Downing Street to actually protest against vaccine passports. Not against the vaccine, but against vaccine passports. Because for me to give my medical history to anybody, never mind, pubs or nightclubs or anything else, it's just absolutely crazy and it's wrong.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the thin end of a fairly horrendous wedge, because once you've got these things, they get digitalized, they can put all sorts of extra information on. Of course, every time you swipe your ID card, passport, it will register where you've been. And we get this constant thing. I hear this so often, and it really, to coin a phrase, grinds my gears when people say, well, if you've done nothing wrong, what have you got to worry about? And frankly, when we live in a country that has people in it as naive as to think that, who defines what is wrong? Who is to say what is right or wrong? And this is the danger of these ID cards. I mean, I'm not going to use the word vaccine passports because that's not what this is. This is an ID card where our information will be kept, our movements will be tracked, and maybe sold on to commercial organisations as well.
Yeah. But there's a legal aspect to this. I've been speaking to Francis Hall, who's a friend of mine who I met recently down in London, and he's really been looking into this. And there are legal grounds against our human rights. You can't forget this. Our equality and our human rights, basic human rights that we have, and this impinges on that. And I think people who think that it's not going to happen, well, it's already been happening. Let's be honest, because I've witnessed across social media many people that have been asked when a guy a couple of weeks ago went into a pub, I don't know where it was, in London or somewhere like that, and the landlord of the pub decided that you can't come into this pub unless you show me that you've been vaccinated, show me your medical papers. And it's wrong. It shouldn't be happening. But I don't blame those business owners. I blame the government, because they have put that fear into business owners, whether it's a restaurant, a club, or whatever it might be. And I think, for those of us like myself, who maybe like yourself, Bill, who have spent years traveling around the world, different parts of the country, the freedom of movement and all that kind of stuff, we've been traveling. And now all of a sudden, I can't go to some of these countries. It's not the UK's situation, but other countries to say, you can't come to this country unless you've had the vaccine. I just think it's wrong. I just think it's wrong. I'm happy to take a test to prove that I haven't got the coronavirus. I'm happy to take a test. But the idea that I have to present some form of certificate, or in your words, digital ID, to prove that my medical history is this, if I had HIV, am I meant to tell people, through this kind of app, have I got, whatever illnesses that might be, other people can catch?
Well, you're hitting an important point, because you said before, playing the libertarian card, allowing businesses, for example, to decide internally whether or not they ask for these passes. Well, what would happen if a business decided, well, I'm going to discriminate against people who haven't been jabbed, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, no, gay people are allowed, because I've decided that I want to discriminate against them, or anyone of a different ethnicity, or no, women, and on it goes. You cannot allow discrimination on one ground and then say, oh, but we're against it on others. That's hypocrisy. And one thing I want to add to that as well for your thoughts, because I'm interested on this, because I haven't heard anyone address this. What happens if insurers start saying, well, actually, we're concerned about legal claims against your venue, and what we might need for your insurance to be valid is for you to go on the route of ID cards?
Well, that's a very, very, I have not heard that, but that's a very, very good question. I mean, you mentioned a word in that was very important. It's called discrimination. And I think a lot of people like myself would consider the idea of introducing ID, or vaccine passports, as I like to call them, as discriminatory, because they basically, what they do is they divide society. It's the haves and the have-nots. So if you've had the jab, then you're entitled to freedoms that those who haven't had it are not. And I think businesses would face legal battles if they were to discriminate along this way. For example, if I was a gay person and I went to a bar and they said, you can't come in because you're gay, I can take them to court and I can sue them. There's libel, because of discrimination. Now, would that happen the same if an unvaccinated person said, well, that's discrimination. You're discriminating against me for not showing you my personal medical data. And therefore, it's a breach of my human rights. And therefore, I should sue you. So I think, but what concerns me more about this bill, the government themselves have created this division. This isn't something that businesses have, decided they're going to discriminate against us. Boris Johnson has put this in motion. He has set this up in such a way, and you're in Wales as well, we probably see the same with First Minister Mark Drakeford, where discrimination becomes the order of the day, and they'll do it all in the name of public health. Because we're in a public health crisis, you can discriminate against me. I think what's important to remember here is, history always repeats itself, doesn't it? And when you look at what's happened historically throughout generations, not just in the last, couple of decades, when things like this happen, they have always ended in disaster. They've always ended up with, society being broken and divided, divisive, and people get angry. And what I fear more than anything, Bill, and I don't advocate violence. That's the first thing I need to say. And I've been on many protests, as you know, here in Wales, in Cardiff, and in London, and a few times now. And it's quite palpable that the sense of anger that I feel in the people while they're holding placards and they're just shouting. There's going to come a point that if the government continue down this road of this regime of authoritarianism, as I see it, and tyranny, people will respond in a way that I don't believe is the right way. But I'm afraid that sometimes that is the only action that people are left with. We've seen it in other countries across Europe. Macron, what he's done to his people over there, the people are now taken to the streets, and we've seen some of the police brutality. In some cases, people have deserved, to be arrested. Of course, I get that, but I think this has come from the top, and I think that's what people are waking up to. And I think we cannot discriminate against people because of their medical history, and I think there's legal case for that as well.
Yeah, and I saw some interesting police brutality coming out of Germany as well, which you would have thought, of all places, they would have thought very carefully about their approach, but it's getting worse. Now, the thing is, it is everywhere. The same approach towards this pandemic is almost happening in the same in virtually every country. Now, we talk about learning from history. I can't think of a time in history where so many diverse governments of all shades around the world, of different cultures, etc., have been acting in an almost identical way and using the same phraseology, like "build back better," the code words for the awful nightmare we're in. Isn't it a bit odd, do you think, that they're all acting in the same way? Is it me again? Am I being bonkers, or is there something strange about it?
No, you're not. This Build Back Better is a load of rubbish. I mean, it's nonsense. And it's internationally accepted now. We've heard presidents say it, we've heard governors say it, we've heard Boris continually say it. Build back better what? What are you building back better? No, we need to build back something that's normal. We need to get back to how we were. What is this Build Back Better? It's just this kind of, and I'm not into conspiracies, but when you hear some of the things like, this big global reset, are we facing something like that? It makes you question it, doesn't it, really? When you think about it, well, what is it? What is Build Back Better? Because when you nail it down, it doesn't really make any sense to anybody. It really doesn't. All it means is we want more control of your daily lives. We want to dictate to you how to live. We want to tell you where to go, when to go. We want to tell you what to eat, what not to eat. It was eat out to help out. Then it was kebab for a job. Make your mind up. I mean, they've done so many different things that I think any normal person with any common sense would sit back and go, what the hell is going on with this government and governments around the world? Now, Bill, you like I, very notable. We watch stuff on social media. There have been in the last few months millions of people protesting against the vaccine passport, for example. Yes. An illustration, and I mean millions of people. You've seen the images on Twitter or Instagram and all these other TikToks. Social, I'm not on that because for kids, but anyway, and lunatics as well. But anyway, all that kind of stuff. And I just think to myself, and none of this has been reported by mainstream media. And it's like we're not talking about a few thousand here. We're talking about millions of people. And I think to myself, they're choosing because what they don't want to do is they don't want to put it on mainstream media because they don't want people waking up to the fact that we might have a point, we might have a case that that governments are ruling tyrannically, like a regime, an authoritarian regime that is actually trying to take complete control of our lives and telling us what to do. And I think for me personally, I will always fight against it. I'm happy to receive criticism. I've been called a cunt, I've been called this, I want to come and kill you, I've had death threats. I accept that. But I'm not doing it just to get on TV or just to be noticed. I'm doing it for my kids because I will not accept it and I don't want it. And I will continue to fight against it. And I think this discrimination we're seeing now with vaccine passports, they said they wouldn't bring it in. Don't forget, they said the vaccines wouldn't be for children. And now they're talking about it. So I don't believe a word this government says.
No, quite rightly. So I think the abuse that you're getting in some amount now, and that many of us have had for some time, I would use it as fuel. I feel lonely when I haven't got someone threatening to kill me or telling me that I'm an evil monster. I feel like I've somehow failed in life. So it's you eventually you get to the point where you think, oh, I enjoy this, and I actually screenshot some of them and keep them. And when I wake up in the morning, I look at them, oh, that's great. I've really cheesed this bloke off. So it's quite good fun. But there is something I wanted to touch on because we important issues that I want to cover here. You say nobody's sure what Build Back Better means. Let me put a theory. Build Back Better means build back greener. At the same time that we're having all of this hysteria about the pandemic, the climate change hysteria is being cranked up a notch as well. And if you look at the green ideas that are being peddled as the only way to save the planet from imminent destruction, they cannot take place without a large degree of government control because people wouldn't choose them if they were free to choose. So I'm strongly of the opinion that what actually we've got here is never let a good crisis go to waste. I think they've seen a chance to knock down the structures that we live by and rebuild it in a way where we're more controlled and therefore can be more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, but first on that, I mean, I'm not a climate change denier. I'm not saying things don't affect things, and I'm not really a scientist, so I can't really comment on that. But what I would say is this: is that when you look at the approach the government have taken on this, and they're talking about this green revolution and everything else, and the cost it'll be to someone like myself. So a family, for example, that has to change their boiler, it'll cost them £10,000, or someone has to change their car to electric car. I mean, people are still paying off their cars, monthly. That's the reality that most of us live in. And so the cost to an individual is astronomical. That's the first thing to say. I think the other thing is that this whole kind of green revolution for me is something that's been on the agenda for years and years and years. People have always talked about it and the government have jumped on it. Now, my biggest concern, and I'm putting this out there, and I'm call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want, but I'm put out there that I fear that we'll have a climate change lockdown. Because, and I'll give you the reason for that, is because I remember when we were in lockdown, there were lots of things being pushed out. I know people noticed this, your viewers as well. People were talking about how quiet it was, how you could hear the birds, how clean everything was. The rivers were better because we weren't polluting the earth because we were all in our houses locked down. I watched that. I noticed that. And to a certain extent, they were right. Because we were all locked in our homes, literally when we had the first lockdown, I did notice things were different, environmentally. I certainly did. Less traffic on the roads, for example. So, I got the Hedge of the Valley Road runs through not through my house, past my house down here, and you can hear the traffic if the windows are open. But during that lockdown, you couldn't hear it. So noise reduction was lowered. So I understand, and carbon emissions, probably, all that stuff. And I was watching it very carefully. And then 18 months on since the lockdown, now we've had this whole idea of this green revolution. And I'm wondering whether or not they run out of steam on the vaccine, and because herd immunity, 90%, whatever it is in the UK. And once they've done with that, if they put any lockdowns or impose lockdowns on us again, they know people will not accept it this time. It's not going to happen. We will rise up and say, no, enough is enough. We'll ignore them. I just wonder, I'm asking the question, I'm not making a statement. I wonder if this card of the green revolution, Build Back Greener, is another way to introduce certain measures that restrict us in society and take away our freedoms?
Well, I think that it's a good question to put. And and I'm sure anyone who's watching this will make their commentary on social media when they get around to looking at it. But for me, I think that is exactly what's happening, and I think that we so much was made of this. Oh, nice, how much nicer it is. Time to reflect and think how we could do things differently, and oh, how clean everything is. How about time to reflect on the fact that those measures were actually destroying the livelihoods of people, keeping the poor so much poorer than they've been, destroying social mobility, and stopping people who, it's only been a short period of time in terms of decades, where everyday people like you and I could get to see the rest of the world, could actually have these new experiences because it's only been affordable for a short time. I believe that what's going to happen is they're taking that away from us plebs, and it's only for the elite to travel. So people like Greta Thunberg can go around on her luxury yacht somewhere. They're telling us how evil we all are for leaving the TV on standby. I think that that's what this is about. And until it's proved otherwise, I'm unshakable on that. And I think that is something that people have really, really got to strongly stand against.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in what you've said there, and I've witnessed it myself. Because I said earlier in the program tonight, there's there's the us and them, there's the elite, who can get to do what they want because they've got money, and the rest of us plebs, as we call ourselves, the little people like us, as Nigel Farage used to call us, the little people, where we don't have the means necessary and things like that. When you look at the agenda that's been pushed, this green agenda, and let's not forget, we've got groups like Extinction Rebellion. I was on a debate with them last year on Radio Wales here, and they had no real answers on some of the questions that I have. And some of those questions were around, well, look, we have the change of the seasons. It's summer, winter, autumn, spring. We have them every year. When you say there's floods, we've had floods every year. We've had snow, bad snow. I remember when I was a kid, we all these things that you hear. And I'm not saying that there is a problem. Right? I'm not saying there's a problem. But to the extent of the problem, I have an issue with, because I don't believe it to be as bad as they say it is. Like Wales, like now they're saying, we've had beautiful sunshine the last couple of weeks or so. It's always raining in Wales. For those of you who don't know, Wales is always raining, right? It's pouring now with rain. There's no global warming happening in Wales, I can tell you, right?
Good to know it hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't. It's not changed. And I just think that a lot of these things, again, when the government, especially when the government get involved, they jump on this bandwagon. And Boris has done this, this big green revolution he's talking about. And they've done it here in Wales as well, because they want to bring carbon emissions down by 2030, whereas the government's 2050, I think. And they always compete against each other, Westminster and the Welsh Parliament, of course, because they're Welsh Labour. And I think, it's the cost. What it does is, as you mentioned, Bill, the people it hurts are people like us. It hurts the pockets of your viewers who can't afford to replace, all their insulation in their home. They can't afford to place a boiler. They can't get an electric car. I mean, look, it's outside of people's means. And I think when the government are coming up with these ideas, to me, it's preposterous. And I think they really need to think about it. And I think Boris is playing to a certain narrative. He's appealing to a certain group of people, because maybe he's thinking at the next election, he needs to find some different voters, because those of us who did trust this government over Brexit and voted for Conservative at the 2019 elections might be thinking, we don't trust this government anymore. So I wonder if he's going for a different proportion of people that potentially would vote for him, Bill.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to. We're into the latter part now, and so I want to bring it a little bit to politics. I know that you've been a campaigner and you've stood for elections, and I've followed the way you've campaigned, because I must admit that seeing some of the stuff that you did when you were standing for your elections, it did remind me of how I used to do it as well. You were very local focused, and I really enjoyed following your campaigns. We don't have an opposition in this country politically, really. We've got, Labour and Conservatives, two cheeks of the same arse, basically, doing the same thing. The opposition, smaller, radical, but let's be honest, ex-UKIP type people are fragmented everywhere. How are we going to democratically and electorally fight back?
That's a very, very good question. And first, let me say thank you for your words on my campaigns in elections as well, Bill, and likewise. I think looking at the political landscape at the moment, it's not a very encouraging one. I mean, when we look at Labour, for example, under the leadership of Keir Starmer, Captain Hindsight, I mean, they're not in any form what I would call an opposition to the current government. Liberal Democrats are almost non-existent. I know they've still got seats, and here in Wales, they got one seat. They just about held on through the regional proportional representation through the regional list, so they weren't elected. They didn't actually win the seat in that respect. And I think that it's quite sad. So let me just give you some examples here before I answer the question. In Wales, we really have three parties. We have the Welsh Conservatives, Welsh Labour, and Plaid Cymru. Three political parties in our parliament in Wales. I mean, that's how bad things have got here, where we don't have a kind of representation of other political parties because, for whatever reason, they didn't get elected, of course, and the Lib Dems just one seat. When you look at what's happening in Westminster, week in, week out, a Prime Minister's Questions time, and you listen to Keir Starmer, he's not an effective opposition leader. That's clear for the country to see. You know, he's probably a very likeable chap. He's probably a very experienced chap. He's worked in Crown prosecution for many years, you know, and he's probably a tidy guy. So I'm not no personal attacks, but suffice to say, he's no Tony Blair. Let's put it that way. And listen, I didn't like Tony Blair. I still don't like Tony Blair. But you have to say, you know, as a leader and as a speaker, he knew what he was doing. And I don't think Labour have that at the moment. Now, there is talk, of course, of this coalition of some of these parties coming together, the Liberal Democrats and, you know, Labour and others as well that are in the House of Commons coming together to form some kind of pact against the kind of Conservative government at the next election. I don't think that'll wash personally, but that's what I've heard discussed. What my concern is this: we've had the Brexit Party, now the Reform Party. We've got the Reclaim Party with Lawrence Fox. We've got UKIP. We've got Abolish Welsh Assembly Party, which was Wales only kind of thing. We've got all these splinter groups, as you've mentioned, and we're all the same kind of thinking people. And somewhere down the road, there needs to be a coming together of minds, and egos need to be put to one side. And people need to say, okay, for the sake of the common good, to really, at whatever election it might be, to come together, to fight, to show real opposition to the government. Not you know, just to, you know, say the right things at the right time just for sound bites, as we're getting from Labour at the moment. It's going to take that, and it's going to be revolutionary, because it's going to be very difficult, because there's some big egos in the room, of course, when you come to politics. I've met a lot of them. I speak to a lot of them. I'm one of them probably as well, people would say. But, you know, like all of us, we've got, you know, if you're a leader, you've got an ego. That's the fact. That's the reality. And I think trying to get people in a room to put those egos down and say, okay, let's work together for the common. Let's create something. I don't know what that looks like. And if I did, then obviously I'd do something myself. People have asked me to start my own political party. I've said, you've got no chance. It ain't happening. You know, but it's nice of them to think I've got that in me, but it's not for me. And I think, you know, there are people, for example, it can happen. People like Nigel Farage is a perfect example. And people might say, some of the viewers, yeah, but he never got elected. Well, he did get elected to the European Union, Parliament, obviously. But more than that, he affected and changed politics more than any politician that's ever been elected. When you think about it historically, he really has that impact. And you look at the impact the Brexit Party had. So I think it can happen. There needs to be a voice, a charismatic leader, someone who would rise up, you know, and just say, look, we've had enough. Let's put our egos to one side. Let's work together for the common good, and let's be a political opposition to the government, and let's get people elected into the House of Commons that speak in common sense. It can happen, and I think it's going to take time, maybe 10, 20 years, but it'll happen.
Well, let's hope it's a bit quicker than that, because I'm getting a bit long in the tooth and I'd like to be able to vote for it. I concur with what you said. Now, look, we've come to the end, really, of our time. It's been a fantastic chat. I've really enjoyed having you on the show, and as I say, it's great to have you, because I've been watching what you've been doing. It's been so good. Is there anything that you can just mention to the viewers that you want to rally support behind, and maybe they can contact you on social media or follow what you're doing, just to understand what's happening next in the fight for freedom?
Yeah, certainly. So I have my Twitter account, which is RW Taylors. You can just search me on there, Richard Taylor Wales. You'll find it'll come up on Google. And you know, and if you're interested, as I am, you know, in fighting for freedoms, and, you know, looking out for the small man, you know, the small people like us, and, you know, then contact me, reach out to me. You know, I'm not one of those who has a full team around me with a secretary that screens you off from contacting me. You know, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a politician. I'm just Richard Taylor from Wales. And I'm here to support and get alongside as many people as I can. As I've said, I'll be down in London on the 14th of August at the next protest. All of that's on my social media platform as well. And you can follow us on Rich Politics as well. Bill, we have our own YouTube channel like yourself. And all the stuff's on there as well. And as I've said, I would say to people, I'd tell them this, look after your family, love your friends, but always remember, freedom is not a right, a privilege that we've been given by the government. It's our right. It is our right. And in the words of Bob Marley, stand up for your rights.
Excellent. What a good note to end on. Richard Taylor, one of Freedom's Warriors, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. Everyone who's watched this, if you like it, share it. Press the follow button. Help us to keep the conversation going. Help us to make sure that the truth and real ideas get out there into the public space. But in the meantime, I'd like to say thank you so much, Richard, and good night to everyone out there.